Kairete Pontes, welcome back. Today's lesson video is super short because we're really just going over one main thing and you've already learned most of it. That might sound weird right now, but it'll make sense very soon. Today we're going to be looking at first declension masculine nouns, and we saw one example of that in our teaser from last week's lesson video. You might remember that. And then we'll be looking at substantives. And if you don't know what substantives are in general, I'll also be explaining that briefly, but we'll look specifically how they're used in Greek. And then we'll also be doing our 7th vocab set, and at the end of the lesson, a little teaser with a sentence with an imperfect verb form in it. So we're getting pretty far into our Greek course for the year, so congrats to you for making it this far. Keep going, I promise it just gets easier as you keep learning new things and getting into the Greek flow. So let's start with our first declension masculine endings. We're going to start with eta stem. So eta stem means the same thing for masculine first declension as it would have for feminine first declension. So for example, one masculine eta stem first declension noun is mathetes, which we'll be learning in our vocab set this week. Looks like this. Looks like it should be feminine, right? But it's actually masculine. All I mean when we say eta stem is that eta sigma ending, rather than an alpha sigma, which we'll see later. So, for eta stem, nominative singular is eis. Genitive singular is ou. Dative singular is a. Accusative singular is ein. And in the plural, actually I'm going to get rid of this circumflex just because we're not doing noun accents. In the plural, nominative plural is I. Genitive plural is own. Dative plural is eis. And accusative plural is as. So, you might be thinking, wait, haven't I learned all these endings before? Yes, but one of them was in a different place. So the one that does not belong is ou, right? Other than that, all of these endings we know from first declension feminine nouns. The only difference being that we would have eis here, right? And also an a here. But other than that genitive, we already recognize all these forms. So all you need to know is if you see this eis ending and an ou in the genitive singular, then you're dealing with a first declension masculine noun. Not too tricky, right? That's already stuff we know, and if it does trip you up, just let me know as usual. And then in the vocative, also pretty predictable, we either have eta or alpha, and then we always have the nominative plural in the plural. So I, just like we have I here. So let's go through and speak all these endings once through just so we hear how they sound put together, and then we'll be doing our alpha stem. So eis, ou, a, ein, I, own, eis, as. And in the vocative, either a or a, and in the plural, I. Now let's look at our alpha stem. This again is the same situation where we're just going to see one ending change from what we've already learned before. So we have as, ou, a, with an iota subscript. Oh my gosh, I keep putting these circumflexes. A, on, and then in the plural, I, own, eis, as. You might be thinking, you're going kind of fast. That's just because we've learned all these endings before. The only one that's weird, again, is the genitive singular. Just that ou, which is what we would have expected for a masculine noun anyways, right? Based on what we've learned about second declension. So shouldn't be too tricky to catch on to this. All you need to remember is that the genitive singular is just like the second declension masculine or what we can call the normal masculine genitive singular ending. And in the vocative, quite literally could not be any easier. We just match a and I, just like the feminine vocative. The only difference is that our rule where we would take just the nominative and make that the vocative doesn't apply here. We have the a. So you can imagine that this is the nominative minus the sigma. Just cross it out, and then you've got your vocative form. So alpha in the singular and alpha iota in the plural. So let's do the same thing that we did with the eta stem with these endings and speak them once through. As, u, a, on, I, own, ice, as. And in the vocative, a and I. So really, it's these two forms that are new, with the genitive being the one that sticks out more. And in the eta stem, same thing. These two forms that look somewhat new, and then the genitive is the one that really sticks out. So as long as you recognize those, you are all set with your first declension masculine nouns. I haven't included any practice this week because of how similar the endings are, but as always, there is plenty of practice available if you click down below the link to this week's lesson worksheet. You can practice with all the masculine first declension nouns that we get in our vocab set this week. So definitely check that out in the description. Okay, now we're on to our second part of the lesson, substantives. And if you don't know what a substantive is, this is when you use an adjective in the place of a noun. So, or an adjective to represent a noun. And this makes the most sense when you actually see a substantive being used. So for example, if we were to just see ha kalos, we can translate it as ha kalos anthropos because this kalos being masculine and nominative, we know that this kalos would modify a man. So ha kalos anthropos is the good man, the beautiful man. And without this anthropos here, we can still translate it the same way because this kalos, the case and use and number and everything, are pointing us to a nominative singular man, a nominative singular handsome man in this case. And let's look at our other examples. So we have he axia anthropos. And if you remember from 1 or 2 lessons ago, whenever we learned anthropos, we're going to see that there are certain nouns, that can be common, so they can either be masculine or feminine depending on their usage. So here when we have that feminine definite article and a feminine adjective, remember we can tell it's feminine by the ending, then you can pair that up with the anthropos without any hesitation and say, yep, that's a woman. Hope that makes sense. Again, if it doesn't, contact me. But here, when we translate he axia, we're going to translate it as he axia anthropos. So, the worthy woman. And so we might as well, at this point, now that we've learned this, erase these extra bits. So we just get these two phrases, ha kalos and he axia, and those are our phrases that say the good or the beautiful man and the worthy woman. So we can just get rid of that noun there. Okay, so now that we've learned our substantives, all we have to do is learn some new vocab. And then we'll do the teaser and be done for the day. So with vocab, we're just learning one new verb this week. So we're learning doulewo. And doulewo means to serve or be a slave to. It takes a dative. And so, for example, you would see doulewo blank in the dative. So I serve blank. And then the future, which we remember is our second principal part, we just take a sigma and add it to our stem, douleo, and so we end up with douloso. Okay, on to our nouns. We start with despotes, which means a master or lord. And now then mathetes, uha, which means a student. Neanias, uha, which is a young man or youth. And in the plural, you can say youth or young men, but when we use youth in the plural, we mean collectively. So like a group of youths as youth, as the idea youth. You can also just say young men. And then oiketes, uha, which means a servant or a family member, either application, depending on its use. And those are our nouns for today. Not too complicated. They're all what we just learned. They're all masculine first declension. And so that should really help you practice and remember these skills with knowing which endings go where and what other declensions we've learned to pull from. And lastly, we've got some adjectives. So first, we have athanatos, which means immortal or undying. And now, I may have mentioned this before, but when we see something like athanatos on, that means that the masculine and feminine forms are both athanatos. And then we have anaxios, on. This means worthless, and it can also take a genitive or infinitive to mean unworthy of or undeserving of or unworthy to, undeserving to, when it's used with a genitive or infinitive. Otherwise it means worthless. And now we have doulos, and you might say, that sounds somewhat familiar. That's because we just learned douleo, which means to serve or be a slave to. Doulos means enslaved. So here we have three forms, doulos, doule, doulon. And doulos, yes, it can be used substantively, but it also is used so frequently that way that it is counted often as its own noun. So doulos, uha means a slave, a masculine slave, and doule, ace, he, is a feminine slave. That should say F. That was my bad. So doule, feminine, doulos, masculine. Okay. And then eleutheros, on, means free of or free from, and it also takes a genitive. So free of genitive thing. And then kakos, on, which means ugly or bad or cowardly or evil or wicked, anything in that negative realm. And then lastly, we have prateros, on, which means former or earlier. And remember, all of these words are down below at the end of the lesson worksheet, just like every week. So after you've done all your practice, you can learn your vocab, or if you need a reference as you're doing your practice worksheet, you can always refer to that at the bottom of the document. Just something good to know. All right, so that's all for vocab, and now we've just got a brief teaser and we'll be done for the day. So, with this teaser, we'll start as usual by trying to identify our subject, our verb, and our object of some sort. So here, what looks nominative? Well, first let's look at our definite articles. We see to and we see ha. Okay, so we know ha is nominative, right? So then this noun, neanias, which we just learned, is a first declension masculine, is our subject. Okay, so now we've identified our subject. From here, we should identify our verb. Well, we see that this is a toe, right? So this is a definite article. And we know that a definite article isn't going to be going with our verb. It's going to go with the noun or adjective. So we can already put off this phrase as not being the verb. And here's what's left, edulewe, which makes sense because we just learned about dulewo, right? So that's our verb. But you might think, wait, what is that epsilon doing on the front? I thought you said the verb was dulewo, not edulewo. Well, when you are going into the imperfect tense, you're going to add an epsilon with smooth breathing to the front of your verb. And this gets a little bit complicated when you have a verb that starts with a vowel or diphthong, where you then essentially condense the epsilon and the vowel, or the epsilon and the diphthong, and you form either a new letter, a new diphthong, or something along those lines where it's condensed. So we'll be learning about that next week, but I decided to start us off with a simpler one, don't worry. And let's look at this ending, right? We have e. We know that the stem is duleo, because we knew that it was dulewo, and when we take off that ending, that omega, we end up with duleo, so that's our stem. We also just learned that we add this epsilon to the front, so now we have eduleo. But what's this a? Well, we've learned in the past that a short epsilon, or short e, so an epsilon, is our second person singular imperative, present active imperative. Okay, but that doesn't really make sense here because we already have a subject. And it's not vocative or anything. So that can't be right. And in fact, it is not. That is for the present, like I just said. That's the present active imperative. This, as we learned because of that epsilon, is imperfect. So we've got some new endings to learn, and that's what we'll be spending most of our time on next week. In fact, this e ending, that epsilon, is the third person singular in the imperfect. So next week, we'll be going into detail about all the new imperfect endings we'll be learning. Should be very exciting. I am super excited personally, and should be lots of fun. I love the combination thing that we do. It's called a temporal augment, where we'll combine that epsilon with other vowels and diphthongs. And I also think that having endings that are new, because right now all we know are our present endings and our future too, although those are the same as present, having something totally new to learn is a challenge, but also makes it so much more satisfying once you get it down. So I'll be coaching you through that starting next week, and I'll see you then. Hope you enjoy. Check out the worksheet down below, and let me know if you have any questions. Bye, guys.